like why don't more women free solo big routes like that? Or like why like what makes your experience on Ciao de Luna or some of the other big routes that you soloed in the Canadian Rockies like why aren't more people doing that kind of thing?
I honestly don't know that many women that are like alpine climbers. I mean, I think there are quite a few in France, like in the Alps. I know a good selection of strong female alpinists, but maybe they just don't have that kind of culture where they go on their own to climb mountains. I don't really know. Although Catherine Destavel soloed the Eiger North Face, which is sweet. Um, yeah, that's a good question. But I do have a ski partner, Christina, and I feel like the ski lines that we've done together and that she's doing right now is parallel to free soloing because it's so committing and so steep. And if you make a single mistake, it's not, it's not possible to make a mistake in that terrain.
Do
So
you
I do
think
feel
that
like she does it.
do you think that there are more women skiing sort of extreme skiing dangerous lines like that than there are women free soloing? Like, do you think that women taking risk is more common in the ski world or in other sort of mountain sports world than it is in the climbing world?
Not particularly. I don't know anyone else that's skiing lines like Christina is in the ski world. So yeah, I feel like it's kind of a rare thing. There are like the occasional people that stand out, but that's a good question. I don't really know why more women aren't in these kind of pursuits, but I mean, it is pretty intense. I guess you've got to be drawn to that intensity.
And so, are you drawn to that intensity?
Yeah. Yeah, not always, but I definitely am. Like I feel it's exciting and also I feel really alert and focused and in control in a way, and when there's pressure, I perform much better. Yeah.
Is that like is does that remind you of like a ski racing background where it's like this is the event, it's time to perform, and like when you're free soloing or scrambling in the mountains, it's like this is your moment, you have to perform.
These are good questions, and I don't feel like it's not like a competition thing. It's more like when there's something, and you can relate to this, I'm sure, but like when there's like, for example, something objectively hazardous, like a hanging glacier that you need to run across to get to a safe zone, like you're gonna be at like high alert. I think it's a stress response too. All of your awareness and attentiveness just like funnels into the right muscles, and you just like get yourself to the right place. And then you can lower your heart rate and can calm down and control your head. But it's like reacting and improvising in the moment to the dynamic environment around you. And those moments of high stress are, I think, really important to train and refine so that you can react even faster. And it's not good to be in those type of environments all the time, but you can get better at it with practice.
Do you think those moments of high stress are a defining characteristic of climbing? Like, is that an important aspect of climbing?
Yeah, I do, because I can even find like moments of high stress in sport climbing, like when I feel the pressure of like I'm red pointing and I'm like giving it my all and trying really hard to control my heart rate just to perform perfectly. And so I do feel that stress in most styles of climbing when you want to ascend and you have everything down.
Yes, it sounds like what you're saying is that like you want your climbing to have consequences, like you want it to mean something, whether that means risk or the stress of sending or whatever else. It's like you just want it all turned up a little bit. But I don't know. I'm just no, I'm totally off script. I'm just kind of like wondering. But I mean, do you think that everybody needs that out of climbing?
No, I don't think so. Some people just want to climb for the pleasure of climbing, like a hobby activity, and I think that's great too. Like, I have a lot of friends that want to just go for a nice day of climbing, and they won't really push themselves. They're happy just climbing 510 or 511, whatever they're comfortable climbing. But for me, when I go out climbing every day, I want to try something or like get better. I always want to get better at whatever I'm doing. So if I mean, unless it's like a recovery day, and then I'll just go out and have a nice day with my friends too.
And so when you say that you want to get better when you go climbing, that requires you to be uncomfortable.
Yeah, usually. There's like for me always some stage of discomfort if I'm trying. Like, I mean, it's not terribly uncomfortable. There's like a good pain and a bad pain. When you know, yeah, there's like a level of, yeah, when there's a level of just difference there.
Yeah, no, it's funny. I keep asking about. I'm like, I basically feel exactly the same way. I mean, I could be giving all the same answers that you are mostly. Where it's like, oh, if you're gonna do something, you want to be good at it, and so to get better at it, you have to push yourself into experiences you haven't had before. So you have to, sort of by definition, you have to be uncomfortable. And so you're
Yeah.
just constantly looking for things that are slightly outside your comfort zone, just to sort of broaden you in new ways. It's like, yeah, no, I feel exactly the same way. But
And I think that's an important point is that like you want to take small steps moving outside your comfort zone. Like if you take a huge leap outside your comfort zone, then there's going to be a lot of knowledge that you're missing or there's going to be a gap. So maybe you're going to take too much risk. But if you take like small steps outside of your comfort zone, you're always taking on a little bit more risk, but you're also getting better. So your skill set is getting in line with the amount of risk that you're taking. So I think the danger is when you think you can do something and just go for it without having all that knowledge and skills to like back up that amount of risk that you're taking on. Does that make sense?
no, of course, I mean, yeah, I feel the exact same way about it. But then, how do you reconcile that slow and meticulous way of taking on more risk with the inherent randomness of the mountains? Because, you can be as controlled as possible and manage your risk as well as you can, but at a certain point, you're still dealing with a very unpredictable medium.
Yeah, exactly. And then you do as much as you can with research into weather and deciding whether or not the mountain and also the reaction of the mountain. Like, for example, if you're going to be going into a zone with a serac or something, just checking out the base of the mountain and how much serac fall is at the base and how much avalanche debris is down there and how active is the mountain. So you're just studying it and then its probability and what are the chances that it's going to happen if you could mitigate your time in these dangerous zones. So it just comes down to research and then probability and whether or not you're willing to take those risks on, I think.
Yeah, but then, yeah, it's just hard because there's still always that randomness involved.
Hmm.
I mean,
Yeah.
it's just hard to know. I'm kind of curious. Do you think that Marc Andre thought about risks in a similar way? I'm kind
Yeah,
of curious because I feel like he had such a more spiritual, like a lot of what you're describing is a very rational approach to risk taking and pushing yourself. And I feel
hmm
like I'm very similar in the way that I approach risk and push myself as a climber. But I feel like
hmm
Marc Andre was slightly more spiritual about it all, on a little bit more of like a personal vision quest and like having these crazy experiences in the mountains. And I'm curious if, like, do you think that he was thinking about risk in the same way, or like what was his approach?
I think he definitely did. Because he taught me a lot about reading mountains, and he was really attentive and practical when it came to making the right decisions. But he also wanted time to like connect with the mountains. So he
Yeah,
would like
exactly.
go in and like spend a night just like underneath the mountain to like see what the energy would be like and see if it was inviting him up. And if it didn't, yeah, like he was kind of like intuitive to
Yeah, I always got a
listen.
little bit more of like a power crystal vibe from him, where he's like, I'm gonna hike in, I'm gonna camp by myself, I'm gonna like feel the aura of the crystals, and then I'm gonna do some totally insane climb that I personally can't even imagine. And I was always like, huh, that's just very different than my approach.
Yeah, but he was very practical with it too, because like he always talked about like the angles of the sun and how it was going to affect the glaciers and how it would affect rockfall. So yeah, he was practical, but and like he was happy to just wait around too. I remember one time we waited at the top of a mountain for 2 hours while it was foggy, just waiting for it to clear up.
Yeah,
So
I remember his experience like that in Alaska actually, where we were descending off Mount Dickey after 30-hour push type deal, totally destroyed, and we got
uh-huh.
to the top of the sort of couloir that we were going to descend, and I was with Freddie Wilson and Renan, who were both more experienced alpinists than I was at the point, and they were like, "Well, it's in the sun, we can't continue down this. We're just gonna sit here and wait." and we
Yeah.
hadn't had food in forever. We had, like we could see camp like way down below, and we have no food. And you're kind of like, wait, we're really just gonna sit here and just wait for like 12 hours for the sun to move? I was like,
Yeah.
oh, this is heinous, but that was the call. You're like, well, this is the safe thing to do, and so we just sat there with no food left, and just I think we all fell asleep in the snow, and then eventually woke up, and the sun had passed, and we're like, okay, now we descend. I was like, alpinism is heinous. And then later on
Uh-huh.
that same descent, we wound up rappelling off of a buried stuff sack, and I was like, this is all getting pretty next level. I was like, when you start burying stuff sacks and rapping off them, I was like, this is the stuff you read about. I was like, I don't think we should do this.
Yeah, see, you're an alpinist now.
Yeah, yeah, exactly.
That's good.
Exactly. But I try to do those kinds of things once a year, and then I hold on to it. It's like, what a crazy story. I try not to do it too often.
Yeah. But I mean, that is something that we both did. Like the year 2018 when the year he passed away, like he had been waiting all winter to climb this project of his, and finally it came into condition. So we hiked up. It was on Mount Slessie also. So we hike up there, and the slopes below the face hadn't slid. So they should have slid for us to do the proper approach, but the snow had just not slid. So we decided not to climb the biggest project, even though the face was in perfect condition, and we climbed a different mountain instead. So like in that case, Mark was thinking like the mountain wasn't inviting him to it because the slopes hadn't slid.
Mhm.
So kind of like using both the practical and the spiritual side to it.
That's tough though, because it's like, he can be so smart about making some choices in the mountains, but then still basically fall victim to unfortunate conditions, it's
Yeah.
like, and I actually wonder, I mean, I've thought about this a lot with Marc-Andre, but then also with a lot of other climbers like Dean or Stanley, or like some of the folks from the valley, is that, or even Ueli Steck, at a certain point, I'm sort of like, these are all incredibly skilled, like incredibly skilled mountain people who were taking very controlled risks, but then
Mhm.
still dying in sort of unfortunate accidents. And I always wonder, I'm like, oh, well, do unfortunate accidents happen more often when somebody's just like in those positions all the time? It's like no matter how smart
Mm.
you are about minimizing risk, at a certain point, it's a numbers game. And if you're doing it all the time, the numbers, occasionally don't work out. And it's like a
Yeah.
tough, I don't know. I mean, I thought that with Uli is like dying in a seemingly routine, like totally sort of mundane situation where you're like, why would that happen? You're kind of like, well, man, if you're doing that day in and day out all the time, every once in a while, crazy things just happen. And like same with Marc
Mhm.
Andres, you're just kind of like, even if you make the best choices all the time, sometimes it just goes sideways. You're like, I don't know how to like, well, yeah, what do you think? I mean, it's not much of a question, but I'm like, what do you think about all that?
Yeah, there's a huge element of luck involved. If you get away with something, you don't even know what you got away with. Maybe like you'll be in the mountains and you'll leave one zone, and 2 minutes later a pocket glacier will slide out, and had you been a minute late, you would have been taken. So that just comes down to luck. And I've had so much luck in alpinism, which it blows my mind, which then also makes me think, when is this luck going to run out? Like last year, I was climbing a mountain in the Canadian Rockies, and it was kind of mixed. It was like mixed climbing, ice climbing, and then rock climbing at the top. So at the top, it was like a big slab, and I put my rock shoes on, and I started soloing because I couldn't find any pro, but my partner had an anchor below me. He put in like a beak and equalized it. It was not a good anchor. And I started soloing up the slab in my rock shoes, but the slab was kind of covered in snow. So I would blow the snow off my handholds, but the snow from my handholds was then falling onto my footholds. And then rock shoes with a small level of snow on it turns to verglass. So then it's just slippery ice underneath my rock shoes. It was so crazy. And I was like, I'd never experienced that before in the mountains, where I'm like trying to dust off snow from my hands, and it's literally just covering my feet. And so I had a moment where I was like, oh my God, this is kind of dangerous. Like if I had fallen, it would have been so dangerous. So I just stopped and froze, and I lucked out that I found a passage that took me left and up, and I was just purely lucky that I found a way. But had that not been there, I don't know what I would have done.
I,
Could have
I
called
was
a
about to
heli
say,
rescue.
Yeah, I was about to say that's a good time to find a traverse. It's like if you
Yeah.
can't go straight up, start doing diagonals. It's like
I
either left or right because like if you're bearing your handhold, it's like time to veer off in a different direction or do
mhm.
like horizontal. Like that is too much.